Hey, welcome back, friend. Tonight, I want you to pull up your blanket, let your shoulders drop, unclench your jaw just a little, and settle into that soft in-between place where the day is finally loosening its grip. Get comfortable. Maybe turn the pillow to the cool side. Maybe let the room go quiet enough that you can hear your own breathing. And as you rest there, I want to ask you something a little unexpected. What really shaped the daily life of a medieval nun? Was it faith alone, the stone walls of the convent, the stern abbess, the heavy veil, the cold chapel at dawn? Those are the answers most people would reach for first. But the real answer, or at least the deeper one, is stranger and more intimate than that. It was time. Time, organized, disciplined. Rung out by bells, broken into prayer, folded into work, measured in candles, footsteps, psalms, bread and silence. Convent life did not simply tell a nun what to believe. It told her when to wake, where to walk, how long to speak, when to eat, what to touch, what to copy, when to kneel, when to sleep, and how to understand the passing of the hours themselves. For nearly 1,000 years, from the age of Saint Benedict in the 6th century through the great convent worlds of the 12th, 13th, and 14th centuries, women across England, France, Germany, Italy, and beyond entered enclosed communities where the day was not their own in the way we think of personal time today. And yet within that surrender, many found learning, purpose, companionship, even a fierce kind of freedom. So if you enjoy these slow journeys into the past, do the gentle YouTube things for me, subscribe if you like. Leave a like if this kind of history helps you drift off, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is there right now. I always love imagining these stories traveling through the dark to reach you, because in a moment you are going to step through a convent door before dawn, when the air tastes faintly of ash and candle smoke, and discover that the first thing shaping a nun's life was not a room, not a meal, not even a vow, but the bell that called her out of sleep and into a world where every hour already belonged to God. Imagine then a Benedictine convent in England around the year 1280, still black outside, the winter cold pressing against the leaded windows, and a nun named Agnes rising before what you would call morning. Her blanket is rough wool. Her mattress is simple. In many houses, women slept in a shared dormitory rather than in private rooms, breathing the same chilled air, stirring at the same sound. The bell calls, and the day begins not with convenience but with obedience. The word rule, so important in convent life, comes from the Latin regula, meaning a straight stick, a guide, a measure. That is beautiful, really. A rule was not just punishment, it was a line to walk by, and the great line behind so many medieval convents was the rule of Saint Benedict, written in the 6th century, a pattern that helped shape religious life for centuries after. Under that pattern, the day was punctuated by the canonical hours, matins, or vigils in the deep night, lauds at daybreak, prime around the first hour, then terce, sext, nun, vespers and compline. 8 pauses, 8 returnings. The word vigil comes from vigilare, to stay awake, to keep watch. Have you ever thought about how strange and powerful that is? To build a life around waking on purpose while the rest of the world sleeps. Agnes pulls on her habit, perhaps black if she is Benedictine, perhaps undyed wool if she is Cistercian, and feels the cloth settle heavily over her shoulders. The stone floor is cold through thin soles. Somewhere nearby another sister coughs. Somewhere a hinge sighs. In the church the candles make small islands of gold. Voices begin, not dramatic, not hurried, but measured, familiar, almost breathing together through the Psalms. This was the true skeleton of convent life. Prayer did not interrupt the day, prayer was the day. Everything else was fitted around it. Reading, sewing, eating, work in the garden, care for the sick, silence, even sleep had to bend around the office. In some communities, the whole schedule shifted with the seasons because daylight itself mattered. Winter dark lasted longer. Summer dawn came early. Time was not abstract. It was felt in the body, in numb fingers, in smoke, in sunrise. Next time your phone alarm vibrates on the bedside table and you feel mildly offended by it, think of this older kind of alarm. A bell pulling a room full of women toward prayer hours before dawn. Simple as that. And yet there is something deeply moving here too. Because repeated action has a way of carving meaning into ordinary life. Agnes might chant the same psalm she chanted yesterday, and still the sound lands differently in the chest. That is how routine becomes devotion. That is how discipline becomes atmosphere. That is how time itself becomes a cloister you can walk inside. And once you begin to see that, you start to notice that the convent was not only governed by the clock of prayer, but by the spaces that carried those women from one duty to the next. Each room quietly teaching them how to live. Let us step into those rooms now, because architecture in a medieval convent was never just architecture. It was instruction made stone. The word cloister comes from the Latin claustrum, meaning an enclosed place, a barrier, a lock. You can hear the hush in it. Cloister. A closed world, but also a protected one. Picture a young novice in Saxony around 1170, maybe 14 years old, the daughter of a local knight, not yet fully professed, still learning how to move correctly through this enclosed map of holiness. At the heart of her convent is the cloister walk, usually wrapped around an open central garth. From it she can reach the church, the chapter house, the refectory, the dormitory, perhaps the warming room, the infirmary, workspaces, storage, and the little thresholds where the enclosed world met the outer one. She does not wander aimlessly. Few of us do, really, though we like to imagine we are free. In the convent, movement itself was regulated. The church drew her to prayer. The chapter house drew her to correction and community business. The refectory drew her to meals. The dormitory drew her to sleep. Even silence had a floor plan. In some orders, silence was expected in the church, cloister, dormitory, and refectory. Conversation could be sharply limited, and certain necessary words were replaced with gesture. The chapter house gets its name from capitulum, a little chapter, because a chapter of the rule was often read there. Imagine that room in the pale morning. Wooden benches, cool walls. The abbess present not as a distant symbol but as a daily authority. Faults might be confessed. Business might be discussed. Instructions given. This, too, shaped routine. Not simply prayer, but accountability. Not simply private virtue, but communal discipline. And there was enclosure. In 1213, Cistercian rules declared that no nun should leave the enclosure without permission from the father abbot. Visitors were tightly controlled, and in some places, until 1237, they could speak with nuns only through a timber-barred gate. A gate, just think about that. Voices crossing wood. News from the world arriving filtered, delayed, framed. Have you ever waited behind a door for a conversation that mattered? Then you already know something of how architecture can shape emotion. And still, the convent was not lifeless. Far from it, footsteps softened the stone, wax dripped, keys turned. A novice learned where to stand, where to bow, when to lower her eyes, how to carry a book, how to listen for the bell echoing differently in the church than in the cloister. She learned the smell of damp wool after rain, the brightness of frost in the garth, the particular piece of afternoon light on pale walls. Think about your own home for a moment. How the kitchen makes one kind of mood and the hallway another. How certain rooms quietly train your habits without your noticing. Medieval nuns lived that truth intensely. Space taught them obedience, but also rhythm, belonging, memory. The convent held them, and in holding them, shaped them. Yet even stone and silence were only part of the story, because once the bell released them from 1 hour of prayer, the next question was immediate and practical. What did these women actually do with their hands? And how did the body itself survive inside such a disciplined life? Now you know the hours and the rooms, so let us move into the texture of the day itself, where prayer met hunger and devotion met work. If the church was the heart of convent life, the refectory and workroom were its steady hands. The word refectory comes from the Latin reficere, to restore, to remake. I love that. A place of eating understood not as indulgence, but as repair. Picture Sister Matilda in Yorkshire in the year 1440, walking with the others to the communal meal. She is not deciding what she feels like having. Choice, in the modern sense, hardly enters into it. In one Cistercian house, records suggest each nun might receive 1 loaf of bread and half a gallon of ale a day. A whole loaf, half a gallon. Medieval numbers feel so solid, don't they? During Lent and Advent, when meat was forbidden, she might receive 2 herrings a day. Butter in summer perhaps. Cheese sometimes. Even measured yearly by weight, 2 stones in some records. A pig and money for beef might come as annual provision. Food was simple, repetitive, often taken in common. Sometimes in near silence while a text was read aloud. Can you hear the scrape of bowls? The small cough, the reading voice rising and falling over pottage and bread. Not luxury. Not starvation either, at least not always. Sustenance, order, enough. And after the meal, work. Medieval nuns read, wrote and illustrated devotional texts. Some copied prayers and chants. Some managed estates, some supervised servants, tenants and storage, some embroidered church vestments with astonishing skill. English needlework was so admired that fine embroidery could travel far beyond convent walls. Fingers moved through linen, wool and silk. Gold thread caught the candlelight. Elsewhere, women worked gardens, prepared herbs, cared for the infirm, taught children, received approved visitors, distributed alms. At Lacock Abbey, founded in 1232, bread and herrings were reportedly given to 100 peasants on the founder's anniversary. So the convent routine did not only turn inward, it also rippled outward in acts of care. Picture Matilda in the herb garden after rain, brushing rosemary and sage with her sleeve, the smell rising green and clean into the cool air. Or imagine another sister bent over parchment, the faint scratch of quill on skin, a little lamp beside her, lips moving silently over Latin she has learned by repetition more than conversation. Have you ever thought about how much of human history was held together by people doing patient, almost invisible work with their hands? Think about that next time you fold laundry, stir soup, mend a hem, type the same careful correction into a document, or prepare food for someone you love. Repetition does not make a task meaningless. Sometimes it makes it sacred. Of course, convent life could also be wearying. Bodies ached, rules chafed. Some nuns were scolded in visitation records for gossiping, for preferring bed to choir, for keeping pet dogs or rabbits, even for wearing laced shoes or clothes too close to secular fashion. That is one of the tender things about the past. However strict the institution, people remained people. Hungry, sleepy, vain, dutiful, stubborn, funny, devout, distracted. The routine shaped them, yes, but it never erased them entirely. And that is where the story becomes most human of all. Because beneath the bells and stone and bread and wool, there was always an inner life no timetable could fully contain. And that quiet, ungovernable inward world is where I want to take you now, because it is the part that still reaches across the centuries most gently. The thing that moves me most, looking back at medieval nuns, is not the severity people often expect. It is the intimacy of their ordinary perseverance. Not every nun was a famous visionary like Hildegard of Bingen, born in 1098, who composed music and described luminous spiritual visions. Not every nun advised pilgrims or nobles. Many lived and died in near obscurity, known mainly by a name in a ledger, a tiny correction in a manuscript, a burial beneath a worn stone, a mention in an account book noting candles, ale, herrings, cloth, and yet their days were real in all the ways that matter. A woman woke in darkness. She crossed a cold floor. She sang while tired. She listened while hungry. She worked with sore fingers. She tried to keep her mind from wandering. She noticed spring arrive in the cloister garden. She missed someone. She felt comfort beside familiar voices. She endured discipline. She laughed when she should not have. She prayed again. There is something almost unbearably tender in that. Because when you strip away the medieval habit and the Latin psalm and the enclosure wall, what remains is a human being trying to make a meaningful life through repetition, community, and hope. And is that not still what so many of us are doing in our own strange modern cloisters, our apartments, offices, hospitals, classrooms, routines? We wake, we answer the bell, whatever form it takes. We move through our designated rooms. We eat, work, worry, rest, begin again. The scale is different, the technology is different, but the longing is familiar, to belong somewhere, to be useful, to be forgiven for being imperfect, to feel that the small acts of a day add up to something larger than themselves. Medieval convent life shaped nuns by narrowing the world, yes, but also by deepening it. Within a limited space, the smallest thing could become vivid. Beeswax on a candlestick, frost on a cloister path, the rustle of pages, the warmth of ale, the kindness of a sister adjusting your veil, the relief of Compline at day's end. Compline from completorium, the completion, the closing of the day. I think that is why these histories can feel so soothing at night. They remind you that humans have always sought forms for ending the day well. A final prayer, a final lamp, a final silence before sleep. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me and for keeping me company in the quiet corners of history. If you'd like, leave me a comment telling me which part of convent life stayed with you most tonight. The bells, the cloister, the workroom, the shared meals, or the silence. And if these slow journeys help you rest, you can always subscribe and leave a like in that soft, unhurried way. In the next video, maybe we'll wander into another medieval world together. Perhaps the long night watches of a monastery, or the hidden routines inside a castle kitchen when everyone else is asleep. But for now, let the bell go still. Let the candles burn low in your mind. Let the stone corridors empty, and let those centuries of whispered prayer drift gently past you as you close your eyes. Good night, friend.